cá nhân rồi trong này chỉ cái tin cha phong như sẽ tập vào chuyện nàyแต่của nhân sự cha nhớ bên mong USA TV là một trong lúc xưa nó là chỉ cũng như hay họ thì bây lúc xưa mong chỉnh chỉnh nó cũng mấy thứ khoa chức sinh hiện tới rồi này cho này cũng bao nữa là tới cho này cũng chỉnh tàu bao nữa khả năng này cũng giờ ít thứ khoa này cũng tàu tua kia đấy cái tua thế tôi một chỗ bây giờ cái tin cha mong sẽ nhớ rồi bên luôn trong California nó thếเราจะhọ bên rồi Fresno nó thế nó chỉ bên cũng tàu trong xe thì này cũng cái ít lúc xưa là một công ty như là mong USA TV nó cái bên họ bao nữa thì họ cho linh từ thế họ cho nên là một khi trong này sẽ được thế cái này họ bao thì họ cho linh từ ấy giao lý chăn sẽ ấy thuộc khoa chức sinh là một lý nó chỉ nhớ rồi từ cuối sáng rồi nè nhớ rồi từ cuối sáng họ nói chỉ này cô bỏ tôi thì bé cô mua từ nó này cô lúc bé cô hồ line nó rose and black nó này cô giờ ít tu tiền này nên đỡ tới xí mà này ít tu thì sáng cả bé chậm không thở cho hiện cơn gầu liền giờ lên đây chỉ cô trong xe thì này cô không tôi cũng bé thế tôi muốn cho cô tham gia họ nói thế well I know it's a pleasure meeting you today and thank you for taking your time come out to Hmong USA TV and I'm sure many Hmong family probably had met you in the past, but anyway, I want to give you this opportunity to go ahead and say hello to everybody at home and maybe share a little bit about who you are first before we carry on our conversation.
Good. First of all, thank you for having me. This is such a professional setup that I'm really impressed, and it's a chance for me to catch up with Hmong families, Hmong American families, some of whom I've seen in person, many whom I have not, but I go back, as most of you know, to the days when Hmong were refugees in Thailand, to the first days when you came into Nampong and then to Ban Vinai, Nong Khai camp as well, and the camps in northern Thailand, in Majarim and in Pua districts, and our efforts working particularly with Jerry Daniels, whom you all know of, and an effort to make sure the Hmong were not forgotten, because you were refugees from the secret war, as we were discussing, and always hard to help refugees initially after a war. The Vietnam War was unpopular, but even harder to help the Hmong refugees because they were from a secret war and nobody knew who they were at all. So we had a lot of challenges in the old days, and we can get into a little bit of that history to tell you what it was like back then, if that's something you would be interested in.
Oh yeah, definitely, of course. Line nó cũng vậy từ tin này thì thủy sáng gặp bây giờ mong thổi biết thở trò kia tới chờ là chùa lòng rồi tới chờ thái thì này có vấn đề bây giờ tôi rồi tới chờ nó là cũng vậy cho thì tôi muốn cùng để suy sản phát rồi sẽ đang. But anyway, yes, tell us a little bit about the history. How you get yourself involved in what you do to help out Hmong community during the war time. I don't know how exactly. Maybe you can kind of like share a little bit.
I will, because it's a very accidental story, really. I guess a lot of life is accidental, but I served as a young man in Vietnam from 1967 to 69 in a program aimed at improving rural security and development in Vietnam called the CORDS program. It was also called the Pacification program, which was not as good a name, but it involved the U.S. military, the U.S. State Department, USAID, the CIA, all the various U.S. agencies trying to work together in a coordinated fashion to improve security and development at the village level, whereas the enemy, the communists, were of course busy trying to erode that. And it was a different approach than using the American military men to try to control the countryside. The idea was Vietnam had to stand on its own 2 feet. It had a military, and we had to be very careful to try to promote that growth, not just come in and say, we're going to take over with 500,000 men. And then, of course, the tendency is to sit back and say, fine, you do that. In Laos, as you know, the approach was very different because the Geneva Accords, no foreign countries were allowed to have military there. But, of course, everybody was busy fighting the war, but secretly. But we didn't know about that in Vietnam. So in 1967 to 69, I completed my service in Vietnam. I knew something about a secret war, and I went on to have an assignment in Thailand as a diplomat with the State Department. And then I realized in 1975, about 5 years later, that Vietnam was looking quite shaky. And I was lucky enough to be a young officer assigned to a top-level position at a low position, but to Secretary Kissinger's assistant's office. So we could see from looking at the intelligence that the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA as we used to call it, as you used to call it in Laos as well, was moving quickly south, and there was a danger that all of Vietnam would collapse. So our goal as younger officers who had served in Vietnam was how do we make sure that we take some Vietnamese who worked with us? We came up with the estimate of 100,000 civilian and military officials times 10 for the Vietnamese family side, so a million people. And the State Department people said, this is outrageous. A million people, no way we're going to leave Vietnam and take a million Vietnamese with us. We kind of knew that was going to be high, but that sensitized them to the idea that we have to leave by taking some of our allies with us. Ultimately, we got 150,000. Ultimately, Saigon fell on April 30th, and we were left over with 11,000 unused evacuation numbers, they were called then. Well, instead of giving them back to the U.S. Treasury with the numbers to admit them, we set up a small program in Thailand. And I did a survey. Luckily, I spoke Thai based on my earlier assignment. I did a survey to find who the refugees were that were most closely associated with the U.S. Much to my surprise, it wasn't refugees from lowland Laos. It wasn't refugees from Cambodia, of course, because they were being killed by the Khmer Rouge. They couldn't even get to the border. It was these hill people from Laos who had fought this secret war. They were from something called the SGU, Special Guerrilla Units, which, as you know, were funded by the CIA, but nobody knew about it. On the other side of the border in Vietnam, nobody outside of a small number in the CIA and the State Department knew about it, and they were coming in to Nong Khai by themselves. 12,000 were flown to Nampong, directly out of Long Cheng, by the courageous work of General Heine Anderholt, and many were left on their own, having to flee on their feet. And I got introduced to this group almost by accident, because I discovered Jerry and Mac Thompson, John Tucker, 3 very dedicated refugee officers from Laos, all of whom stayed with the refugees. They didn't try to get reassigned or go anywhere else. They stayed in Udon. And I said, tell me about the refugees. And they said, well, we have everybody. We have Tai Dam, we have this, we have that. We have Lao Lum, we have Lao Sung, Lao Tung in between. And I said, what about this group, the Mao? Because that's what they were called, as you know, by the CIA. And they said, well, they're now all down at Nampong. I said, Nampong, what is Nampong? I knew about the big air bases. Nampong was small. And I said, I wonder if there's a way to see them. And they said, well, you were scheduled to go back to Washington 2 or 3 days, and the only way to do that would be to leave on the plane tomorrow instead of today. I said, no, I can't do that. But I knew the train schedule by heart. I said, what if we drive from Udon now to Nampong? I meet a few of them, and we get on the night train at Khon Kaen in Thailand, and I get to Bangkok the following morning. So Jerry immediately says, okay, let's do it. So we rush out. On the way down, Jerry briefs me about who the Hmong are, who the Mao are, the role they played. I knew, of course, of the name of General Vang Pao, who by then was gone, to the best of my knowledge. I didn't see him anyway. But I came down to Nampong, and I met these guys with American radio call signs, people like Bison, Hammer, Snowball. I couldn't believe the story of what they had done, you know, both in terms of liaison with the U.S. Air Force for close air support, in terms of fighting the North Vietnamese Army head-to-head, the way American troops did with much better arms. And all this we didn't know anything about. And I said, well, if we're going to run a program that is based on association with the United States, on the degree of risk that they took for us, and the degree of risk for them to stay in Thailand, which is not secure, they are probably going to get most of the money and the admission slots. But how do we do this? The first thing was to write a cable describing the need to keep all 11,000 numbers for refugees in Thailand. And that was a battle. The embassy didn't want to, you know, we lost the war. Everybody in the bureaucracies, they don't want to do too much work. Everyone wants to say, we finished, evacuation of Saigon, done, no need to help them all. Anyway, long story short, we battled, and ultimately, I'll take you into January 1976 and tell you about the program that we actually ran based on the work of Jerry Daniels and some other people. But see if you have any questions. To this date, I should add one thing very important. Along with the Hmong who were in the war effort, I also met one other guy, Dr. Yang Dao. And fortunately, I spoke French because his English was not very good then. And I said, Dr. Yang Dao, Jerry said, you should meet him. And fortunately, he had a book with him, his book, Hmong in the Vanguard of Development in Laos. And I spoke a little bit while to him in French. I said, I don't have much time. I said, what is this? He said, this is a book. He said, I'm a PhD from the University of Arras in France. I said, my God, PhD now. They have people who are fighting the war, they have a PhD. I said, can I take a copy of this book back to Washington? He said, sure. And he autographed it. I still have the autograph sheet. I think I've given the original for archiving, but I took it back and I immediately used that in my message, saying not only were these people fighters, they have a long and distinguished culture, and I got the CIA to even though I'm State Department, I got the CIA to translate the book within about 4 days, which was record time. It's a pretty
Wow.
and then make about 500 copies. And I gave the copies out. And I said, this is not just some wild mountain group. This is a group that we owe. And I said, I'm not going to make any prejudgments about where these 11,000 numbers are going, but I want to have authority to open a new program in Thailand and look into how the 11,000 numbers were reallocated. And from then, the real challenge was everybody had to be identified and selected for the U.S. program before June 30, 1976. He gave us less than 6 months to go through 15 camps, not all Hmong, but at least 8 or 9 had some Hmong in them, and other nationalities come up with a uniform cut line, so everybody was about equally based in terms of whether you were Cambodian, a Hmong, and many ethnic groups in Laos, Hmong, Mien, etc., lowland Lao, and some Vietnamese were walking across Cambodia into Thailand. We were just swamped with refugees. So the trick was to do this honestly in a way that was transparent. But before we could do that, the Hmong had been transferred from Nampong to Ban Vinai. The CIA, to the best of my knowledge, paid $2 million to the Thai government to open the camp in Ban Vinai, and that was it. They washed their hands of it. Jerry stayed, much to his credit. Mac stayed, and I stayed, and a few others. We were all known as kind of cowboys because this was unusual for government officials to be this concerned about refugees. And Jerry's job was to show, based on service, which Hmong would come first. And we had a point system. For each person we had a card. How many years of service? What position? Were you wounded? What other thing? How much U.S. training? Was the U.S. training in Thailand, Laos, or USA? And it was very clearly done so that nobody could complain later on that they had been unfairly treated. Ultimately, from the 11,000 numbers, 7,500 came from Laos, and of those, 5,500 were Hmong. And the State Department was incredibly surprised. We didn't tell them until the very end. They said, how can that be? We thought Vietnamese and Cambodians were coming. I said, no, we're taking it based on service to the U.S. And that's the way it was in Laos. And that was what really gave the Hmong a chance to get their roots in this country. And today, that's why we have 300,000 Hmong Americans here and 200,000 other refugees from Laos here. And I'm very surprised. And we began, as soon as they began coming to the U.S., we began calling them Hmong Americans. They asked, can you at least change our name? We don't want to be called Miao anymore. We want to be called Hmong. I said, that much we can do. They didn't want to be dispersed. We said, no, you're going to be dispersed like everybody else if you want to come. So that's how they came to be here, and it's very rewarding to see how much progress they have made from those first very tentative beginnings. And we had a lot of people who also criticized us, and they said, well, they may be good fighters, but they look too primitive to come to the U.S. And they don't bathe. Well, one reason they didn't bathe is in the mountains, unless you have access to a stream, you're not going to bathe very much. We explain that. They're illiterate. No, they're not illiterate. They're pre-literate. They don't have a written language. They will be too violent. No, they were violent fighters against the enemy. In fact, better fighters than we were, but that doesn't mean they're going to be violent in the U.S. So we had to do with all those arguments. We won, and the rewarding thing today for people like me and Jerry, although he's not here anymore, and Mac Thompson, John Tucker, and the others who worked for me in that first effort, and there were 10 or 12 Peace Corps volunteers who joined up and helped me, and a lot of Thai and a lot of refugees, Hmong and others. And the rewarding thing is how well you have done in this country. The record far exceeds. We would make promises. You won't regret it. They'll be doing very well in this country, but the Hmong Americans have far exceeded that. Far exceeded that.
Now, as far as your time that back then when you first arrived in the Asian country, now which country will you first enter into, and what exactly do you know your role of job, or did they just kind of throw you out there and say, hey?
No, it's a very good question. I joined. I went for a year to law school.
Mm-hmm.
I did not like law school at all. I didn't think. My grandfather paid for it, poor guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was a lawyer. He said, "Oh, you're going to love the study of law. It's going to develop your mind."
Mm-hmm.
And I had to apologize to him. I said, "Grandpa, I know it's cost you, even back then. It was an expensive law school, but I cannot get with it. It seems just, I cannot do it. But I've passed the State Department exam, and I'm going to join the State Department." And he got very happy about that. So then I go to the State Department for my entering class in 1966, this was. And I said, they asked, "Where do you want to go?" Well, anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's exciting about that first moment in the State Department. Very hard to get into. Written exam, oral exam might last 2 or 3 hours. And in fact, they said to me, "Sure you want to come in? Why not be a lawyer first?" I said, "No, I'm through with law school. I'm coming in." They said, "What are your languages?" And they tested me, and I tested well in French. So they said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "Saigon, or any other French-speaking post in the world." I thought Saigon, Vientiane, or maybe Phnom Penh.
Mm-hmm.
I get up on the day 6 weeks into training, and I said, "You are going to Colombo, Ceylon." Then it was Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. I said, "What? That's not French-speaking. We have 110 posts that speak French." I realized what they're doing. They want to have more people that they train themselves in French.
Mm-hmm.
So they send somebody like me who speaks French already, they send me to an English-speaking post. I said, "It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Illogical." I met my wife, an American who was stationed in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon then, so it was okay. But then 7 months later, somebody remembered, as they began looking for young men to go to Vietnam, somebody remembered, that young single man, Rosenblatt, they were looking for single men, not married men.
Mm-hmm.
He expressed an interest in going to Saigon. Let's grab him for Saigon. So almost as soon as I got there, in those days you had to come on ships with your household effects. So I came by plane, but my things had just arrived. All of a sudden they said, "Top secret cable, you have been reassigned to a new program in Vietnam called Accords." So I have to go back and start my Vietnamese language training in Washington. And then a few months after that, they said, "Now you have to go to Vietnam right away because we're generating refugees in Vietnam that we need to be taken care of in Vietnam." So I arrive in Vietnam, a little Vietnamese, not much. No refugees. This is before Tet. The Tet attacks changed everything in February 1968, late January 68. There were no refugees. So I got into this program called Accords for Security and Development, which was much more interesting and much better training for the work I did later with the Hmong. So you asked me about life, and I said it's accidental, and that was fun about the Foreign Service, that it gave me by accident a profession that I could never have dreamt up by myself, to help people who have been displaced from their homes, who become refugees, and I've stayed with that ever since.
Now, what is the year that you first have contact or ride to any Hmong camp or met any Hmong person?
Well, I have to say, in my 71, 72, I would occasionally visit Vientiane. I was assigned to Udon in Thailand. And oddly enough, I would go up, there was no bridge then. I would go up because the French bread and coffee was so good in Vientiane. And I would see these Hmong and Mien and other people at the Talat Chow, the morning market, and other places. I'd say, who are these Hill Tribe people? And I knew a little about them. But we had no idea that back in the Plain of Jars, they were fighting under General Vang Pao. Very, very tough. Fighting was going on.
But back then, the country was still intact, right? We're not.
Back there, the country was intact, and there were almost no American officials, even in Vientiane. And it was just beautifully French, quiet, a few loud bars for some of the official Americans who were hanging around Vientiane. And it was a lovely, lovely town. Much nicer to be in than Udon. Better cooking. Udon was dirt roads and a big American air base, bombing a lot.
But in 1975, when the war started, breaking up, and people started fleeing the country, were you part of it? Or try to get people into? I only see the plane that, where they come back and try to get as many people out. But see, my part of the country, I live in Sayaburi. So, of course, my brother took us on a flight to Vientiane, and we stayed at this. I think there was a place. like a church that they know, and they took us in for maybe like a couple nights, and then of course we cross over the Mekong River to Thai.
To the Nong Khai refugee camp. Probably.
No, we didn't get to go to Nong Khai. We crossed from Vientiane to the other side, and I know that they took those truck and they just truck all of us into this school. I don't know what the school.
Maybe Si Chiang Mai or Thadua.
Yeah, it's
one of
a
those
school.
districts.
I know that when we were still kids, we woke up in the morning and students still going to school.
Yeah.
It's like they took one to school and they just cleared out and let all of us refugees to stay in that room.
Right.
And they'll bring us some food to eat. And then we were there, I believe, must be 1 or 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then now here come back with those big truck and just truck all of us to
Ban Vinai?
Nampong. Right?
Nampong still.
Yeah.
So when did you come out? When did you leave Laos?
I would say probably right one at the beginning.
Okay, then you would go to Nampong first, because Ban Vinai
Yeah.
did not open until early
Yeah, we were
76.
in Nampong
You were in
for a
Nampong
year.
first. Okay.
We were in Nampong
Okay.
for a year, and then they took
Then
us to
Nampong was closed for Ban Vinai.
Right. So then we
Yeah. So you
left
were
to
early pioneer.
Yes, we were the early pioneer.
But I was not that stage, not there at all. By then, I had left after a year in Udon, and I was so frustrated with the way the Foreign Service was posting me. I didn't want to be just reporting in Udon. I wanted to be doing something active, that I took a leave of absence and didn't come back until just before the fall of Saigon, when, as I said earlier, I began pushing to help the Vietnamese who helped us. But I never forgot Thailand and the fact that I knew refugees would be going into Thailand. So that time in Udon and Bangkok was very helpful, and I knew my way around the borders. So, and I spoke Thai, so
Okay.
that was really helpful.
You stated earlier that during that time with all the Hmong people came. You said about like 5,000.
What's that?
With the number of the
Well, no, yes, up through mid-90s, probably a little over 100,000, 120,000.
Okay.
Yeah, but now much more, obviously, with the increase in population. There were extra programs from places like Tom Krabok, but now there should be about 300,000 Hmong Americans in this country now.
Now, do you have any contact at all to what's going on back over there now? Is there anything that's still, any refugee that's still, left? Or is there any open camp or any?
In Thailand? No. And all the people who predicted, again, in Thailand, the American officials said, "Oh, Lionel, don't stir the Hmong up. We cannot take them all. If you just leave them alone, they will disappear into the woods of northern Thailand." I said, "I don't think so." I said, particularly the ones that were close fighters to us, the Thai aren't going to want them around. They make the Thai nervous. The Lao don't want them on their border. But we had to battle constantly against the idea that we should just leave the Hmong to their own. After we took a few from Nampong, took a few from the summer of 1975, and then in 76, I finally got the authorized survey for all the camps. And the Hmong finally agreed, yes, we'll come to the United States, some of us, even if it means being dispersed. So that was crucial. That laid the groundwork, because we had a good selection from all camps. We even took from the small camps in the north, in Majorim, in Pua District, in Ching Kam, Ching Kong, Ching Sen. We took Hmong and Mian and other hill tribe people to the U.S. in small numbers. So every camp had a few people that had gone to the U.S., which was important later, because they wanted to bring their people later. Turned out we had so many spaces 2 years later. It's important to remember that for 2 years, since 1980, 81, 82, any Hmong, any other hill person who wanted to come to the U.S. could come. Anybody. If they didn't have a polygamy problem, which they could solve easily by divorcing their wives properly and taking care of them first, and then going with the last wife somewhere. Or if they didn't have opium addiction, which could be cured. Or if they didn't have tuberculosis, which could be cured. If they hadn't lied, that was harder to cure, but we could even look at why they did. Any Hmong had that chance. So today, some people are whining, say, "No, my relatives had to leave because they didn't have a chance to come." That's not true. That's not true. What they didn't have was probably anybody who explained to them, really, you're not going to, in the U.S., you will have opportunity to make a good living. Nothing is guaranteed, but you'll have that opportunity. In Thailand, nothing is guaranteed, and you will probably not have that opportunity. And going back to Laos is probably impossible.
Right. What is your challenge while you were, stationed over there, trying to help the refugee and all that?
I tell you, my challenge was having worked in Vietnam with some people that I respected, some colleagues that still, despite all our problems in Vietnam, some Vietnamese colleagues who worked very hard. Some of them died in the process. I said to myself, this war is unpopular. We cannot leave this war like we're doing it now in 1975, just walk out on our allies. And that's nothing I can be proud of as a U.S. government person who served in Vietnam. So we have to stand on that principle. I never want to have regrets when I'm my age. I'm now 72 years old. I don't want to have regrets. So that's what got me into this. Going back at the end, just before Saigon fell, I actually went back. Once we had the task force, I went back to look for some of my friends. By then it was too late. They were all behind enemy lines, but I got some out, and that was the beginning of my continuing involvement. So that's what keeps my heart going. But the second thing that keeps me going is to see people like you, successful in the family you've raised, in the occupation you've chosen, the very important idea of public media for the Hmong Americans, and getting this kind of message out to them and making sure that they get good information, because we still have a problem in the Hmong American community where people believe a rumor and all of a sudden it becomes fact. And maybe another time I can come back if there are rumors that I can help with that maybe I have some knowledge of, but it's important that we get facts on the Hmong TV out to the Hmong Americans across the country. And the Hmong I was closed by saying the Hmong Americans have one advantage that Americans don't have. You have relatives all over the country, in some cases all over the world.
Yes.
This is amazing when you think about it. I predicted the Hmong when they came to Ban Vinai, the elders said, oh, we want to all stay together, either in Thailand or foreign country. I said, I know you do, but you have advantage. They said, we'll even stay on an Indian reservation. I said, no, you don't want to do that. They had done their homework. I said, what you can do, in the end, in one generation, you will have relatives all over the world, France, Australia, Canada, the U.S., French Guiana, some still in Thailand.
Well,
some
just
in Laos.
imagine if we can unify. We have one of the group that with the most languages.
Yes, yes.
That would be
Yes,
awesome.
that would be awesome.
Anyway, now as you now today in your age, thinking back, what are some of the most memorable part? Let's just say with the Hmong group, since we're in the Hmong TV right now. So I'm going to ask you in this particular group.
That's good. That's good. Well, I think the day that after Nampong was closed, and the Hmong leaders at Ban Vinai requested a meeting. Actually, we both wanted a meeting. This topic would be, what do the Hmong want to do with the future? Very uncertain time, early 1976, probably February. So we're a few months after the fall of Long Cheng. They've been moved into Ban Vinai out in the middle of nowhere, but at that point, Pak Chom and Loy was jungle. And in many ways, they liked it right there. But we knew that wasn't going to be permanent. And I remember going into this place, which looked like just a very large Hmong village, very, very large. I said, my God, this is impressive. And then we sat down at a table that must have gone 5 times the length of this room. Myself, Jerry, and a few others. And the Hmong all sat the opposite. And we said, and they had their agenda. And they said as follows. They said, thank you for coming to speak to us, Mr. Rosenblatt. We have some questions we want to ask you. And I said, this is impressive. They've organized themselves. All clans were represented. And they said, our first question is the following. Can you please call us Hmong and not Meo? I said, that one we could probably do. And then they said, second, here's a list of weapons we would like to take cEEB back from the communists, as promised by the U.S. government. I said, first of all, I'm the State Department. I'm not CIA. Secondly, you're not going to get any weapons from me or anybody else. I recognize that it's a great idea because you have the Mekong River easy to defend, but if you want to do it by throwing stones, fine, you're not going to get any weapons from us. I don't advise it. What's your next request? Well, what about a good, safe place where we can all stay together, again, with weapons to keep the communists from attacking us in Thailand? I said, that's not going to happen. Third, what else? And we get, as I mentioned earlier, finally we get, by now they're looking very sad, and they talked about Indian reservations. They said, even in Alaska, we go to Alaska. We don't mind the cold if we can stay together. They're very afraid of being dispersed. I said, no, The best we can do is you're being dispersed across the U.S. like all the other refugees from Indochina. Where will we go? I said, I don't know. You may end up in any state. It's going to depend on the refugee resettlement agencies. I didn't even think of Minnesota then, but that's what happened for a lot. And they said, okay. I said, we're not going to force anybody to resettle. But on the other hand, if people start on this, we don't want any of you older leaders to force them not to resettle. So that's the first agreement we came to with them. And it was very heartbreaking and memorable to see a people coping with trying to look into the future. And at the same time, very impressive to see that they stood together. Vang Pao wasn't there. He was long gone. This was just the leading leaders from the clans as well as from the military trying to figure out what do we want to do when we figure out, when we grow up, as we say now, what do we want to do with the rest of our lives now that we are refugees. So I always remember that meeting. And I always wish I'd kept that list because it showed
all
their
the people who
training,
attend.
it showed their mentality, and it would be a great souvenir to have here at one of the exhibits permanently.
Oh, yes.
This was the Hmong. This was what the Hmong wanted. They had decided this is what they wanted.
Yes, that's what history making.
That's right.
Now, I know that you have a trip here to California. I'm sure you have a place to go. But one of the things that I noticed that since the day that you come to the studio, I have seen some Hmong traditional.
Ah, yes. Yes, this is very
Maybe you can
special.
explain to us a little bit, because I know that it's on Hmong people, but now since you're an American person and I see that on you, and I'm kind of curious to know, maybe you can explain a little bit.
I will be happy to. I'm pleased with the question. My very old and dear Hmong American friend Mo Cha and his wife Rosie were concerned, have been for a number of years, about my health. It's not clear why, but when I'm good and feeling good, I'm like this, 72, but I feel 42. When I'm bad, I'm 72, feeling like 102. And it goes on that can be weeks, sometimes months. Some people think it's chronic Lyme disease, which you may know is back east. It comes from a little tick from the deer. Well, really, we don't know. So finally, we had the idea, Cha did, we will try Hmong shamans. And I even told several of my doctors, I said, I'm going to try this because you guys now for 15, 16 years have not helped. None of the medicines have helped. None of the antibiotics have helped, because if you catch it early, you can cure it with antibiotics, but you cannot catch it later with antibiotics. And I'm going out to see a Hmong shaman. I expected my doctors to say, you idiot, you crazy guy. But they were kind of interested. And so last Saturday, we're talking 3 days ago, at their house, at Cha and Rosie's house, we had 2 shamans, and they did the ceremonies involving the chickens and the scattering of the bones and reading the signs, but a lot of things get rid of the bad spirits, because apparently I might have stepped on a bad spirit unintentionally before. Sounds strange, but I don't rule anything out.
Right.
And the other thing, which will interest you, is that one of the shamans said, we have to also give you a new name. I said, that's great. Why don't you give me the name Lion, like in Lionel?
Lion King.
Yeah, I didn't say Lion King. I tried to be more modest than that. But I thought, gee, he'd think that's a good idea. Nope, he came up with a new, different Hmong name called Tsong Ka.
Tsong Ka. Okay.
And translation is a little bit hard, because it's such a beautiful word in a way. It means somebody who is coordinating and influencing and trying to get things done by even maybe influencing people without ordering them. Sort of like the title I made up for myself in Thailand, Refugee Coordinator.
Right.
Somebody said, well, what are you? You're not a diplomat. I said, I don't know. I make up the title Coordinator.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like that. So we hopefully at Tsong Ka, with the title and the good work of the shamans, is going to keep me more energetic.
I know that we've been talking a lot in English, so I'm not going to go back and explain all that, but I want to really explain a little bit this to the parents at home.
Okay, maybe they can suggest a better translation for Tsong Ka than I have.
Some of our elder.
Okay.
Okay,กูจะถ่ายรูปมีการเราเนี่ยได้แล้วกูจะถ่ายรูปข้างนอกกูเห็นเขานุ่งเสื้อตรงแต่ไลน์เนาะเขาเก๋แต่ในเชิงการจะนึกถึงจอเนี่ยเราใช้ติวอย่างลิจ่าที่นั่นกูหายซาเต้แต่เราหมู่ป้าเป็นเนี่ยเราเต้เจ้าที่นั่นตัวหมดจู่อันนี้เต้นดาวเต้นแต่ที่นั่นก็เนี่ยเขาต้องเราเต้เขมิกาเนาะเท่ายาว่าเป็นสิ่งเนี่ยเราใช้ที่ แต่จะไทยแต่เนี่ยแต่ใช่ไหมเขากูสารมันเปลี่ยนจริงๆนะจะพูดตรงนี้เป้าเนี่ยกูนั่งเนี่ยแต่เนี่ยตัวนึงได้แต่ใช่ไหมว่าจะเนี่ยเขามั่วจะลอยขี้เตะเนี่ยอะไรใส่เตะนั่นนะจะเนี่ยกูอย่าได้จีแต่ใช่ไหมประกาศเคลียร์แต่แต่จริงๆเนี่ยกูแต่เนี่ยจงเสียเคลียร์ไปแต่จงกูเนี่ยแต่เนี่ยกูบริหารหนึ่งมันหุ่นยนต์เลยเทียจะกูมั่วมอแต่แต่เทียเนี่ยจะบริหารจะเนี่ยกูจีบเป้าแต่จะตีวิจารแต่ใช่ไหมเนี่ยกูเตาหูตัวหนึ่งอีตัวพงยืนั่นนะจะเนี่ยกูอย่าไปแต่มองนะsao lúc bây giờ mùa trà nữa nhớ rồi sắp bị một xe mùa trà nhớ rồi sắp bị một xe nè chỉ gia đình đấy chuyện đó thì chỉ cô tàu hu này tua thế thì theo gia đình đấy là giờ này cô mua nó nhung thế này cô oli hay mong là chỉ như tiền lầu rồi thế mua món gần tên là thế này chuyện tua cái mà ba sai sẽ bộ tàu tới giờ nó chỉ chuyện lái nào là nó cô hay đó nữa tụi cứ không món nữa tụi doctor thế thì ô tới rồi đây nữa nếu tôi một trò bé chậm mong hoàn nên cả là ba hoàn nên sai nữa thế sẽ bị trả này chỉ gia đình này cô tàu tôi sao là bé này cô trong xe thì này tụi phong như là một trò này trở nên trò văn sầu những con thâu là nó sẽ là cô tàu hú tàu áo chỉ nên từ này tôi một ba và nên khó đồ nửa thế chỉ này cô bao từ này cô họ ba nửa thế chỉ ta lên đó là mỗi ít tôi cô hai đồ nửa thì tới rồi bé tàu mua rồi luôn bị che rồi có thế là chỉ là cô tàu mua luôn bị che là trò nửa hồ sông cá nữa vậy sông cá này sông cá nữa mà chỉ luôn bên là cô hoa cả thì luôn bên hút sông cá nó cho nửa thiên là chỉ khả năng ôi cô nhận cho ta rồi nửa thiên hiểu lúc sành này á chỉ là chỉ giờ thì vì thế này tụi phong hiểm không mua thế chỉ tới rồi giờ sông cá mua thế này ok thế chỉ là luôn bên thì luôn bên America nó chỉ cô Lionel Rosenblatt nó chỉ là cô giờ ít thôi thì này cô mua xe đạp bao nhà thầu này cô参加bây giờ mong như là sao thì thế giờ thay tới cho lòng rồi sao thì cái参加rồi thì bây giờ我被电到的家一考的呢，我把对面跟个人样的嘛，也得样的，实在叫我的父母年老呢要咯，叫我碰后也应咯，那就也怎么的得考个第大，我电到的个招那些到多呢，就呢我把到的，bây giờ mong实在我到多，แต่เฉยนะ我将跟呢我用些的呢我把被实在一家了，我到后来的呢用的呢贴，我到用的呢我到呢用些的就，那么这路线呢我到多门去找到被用 Fresno 那就被是到家呢了可能。Now in today,
yes,
have you? I mean, how many of the Hmong family that you have met back then that you have also re-met them again over here in this country or have visited them?
Not so many, but I'd say I keep up with about 20 to 25 families.
Okay.
On this trip, I've met only 4 or 5 because we have lots that I know in Minnesota, probably more in Minnesota than any other one place, but also North Carolina, also Nevada, also state of Washington. So I tend to keep up. One of the nice things is Hmong are very good at feedback, and they usually let you know if they have moved or if they're doing something new and different. Often I find with my other friends, Americans as well as other Indo-Chinese Americans, they disappear from the radar, as we say. And the Hmong are very good at saying, oh, how are you doing? I haven't heard from you. Or I'm moving now from place A to place B. So I keep up in that sense by phone, internet with, I'd say, 20 to 25 different families. Okay. So I feel I have a good cross-section. And I know about their kids and the success of their kids. I mean, it's remarkable how many, that most of them have very, very successful children in that, whatever you want to call it, first or second generation, the generation born here or coming here young, as you did in their early formative years, who have the chance to be truly bilingual. I also know there are many problems, and I must say I'm a little insulated from those because I don't tend to know people who have real problems for whatever reason. I'm lucky my friends have done well. But I know I'd like to use the history, as Yang Ku said, who's written a very, very good book, I think, Professor Yang Ku. Or Ku Yang, however you want it, called the Hmong. It's something about Hmong being in the diaspora. Very good. You know, diaspora is being here in the U.S. and other countries, away from your home country. As he's put it, we need to learn from history, but not be bound by history. We need to look to the future and solve problems. And I would like to know more about that in the spirit of how do we solve the problem. We don't need to have Hmong gangs, for example, but I don't know enough about it or know how we might solve it.
Now, up ahead in the future, anything planned, or are you involved in anything, or pretty much just you retire, just relaxing?
No, I'm not totally relaxed. I'm glad you asked. I'm trying to help a small group of less than 400, about 400 hill people in Thailand, in Nan province, called the Mlabri people, who were also known as the Yellow Leaf people, who followed the Hmong refugees into Ban Nam Yao camp in Pua district. And they were not even agricultural people like the Hmong, or hunter people. They were mostly just a hunter-gatherer at the lowest level, gathering whatever small animals they could, and hunting, very small animals. And they have, there's now no forests. Thailand is pretty much done with its forests, helping them, like the Hmong wanted to in Ban Vinai, want to stay together and love each other for the rest of their lives. How can we help them do that? So I'm focused mostly on that, and that's a challenge. We recently got a pickup truck donated for them, but it's not adequate. It's a 1983 or 84 Datsun, so we need to do better than that for them. So that's my passion right now.
Okay, so you still kind of flying back and forth?
No, I do. I had to go once a year for a few weeks in January, February, and and the rest of the time I monitor it. And they're Thai friends of mine and American friends in Thailand to try to help this very small tribe, the smallest in Thailand. The Hmong look so successful by comparison.
Well, in our conclusion for today, I want to thank you for your time coming here to visit us. But what I'd like to see if do you have anything to share with our youngster at home? Because I know that parents is the one that brought a lot of us, and I think that a lot of youngsters probably might not even remember to some degree. Some of them do. But what are some of the experience that you have that you would like to share with
I think one suggestion, and that is that I went down again with Wacha and his wife Rosie, two friends of mine, and the American who was married to an Asian American, and she right away said, I don't know much about Hmong, but I hope you are keeping your oral histories, because like the American veterans of World War II, soon your elders are going to be dying off, and we want to record their history, and the best and easiest way to do that is with an oral history. So I would encourage the younger generation to begin interviewing, maybe 2 or 3 at a time. Might be hard. If you're my father, maybe a little difficult for me to say, Dad, what did you do during the war? But 2 or 3 young people with 2 or 3 older men and women, for example, the Hmong nurses and others. What was life like for a Hmong woman from Sayaburi, like your mother, who's still alive? You tell me. Interview your mother. Give us an example. I'd like to know, what was life like for your mother growing up in Sayaburi? Was she expected to cook, do all the chores for her brothers because she was a woman, or was she given some opportunity?
Right.
Is she happy with the decision to come to this country, or is she miss Laos still? But we need to get their thoughts. And it's not easy. Everybody's so busy in this country, running around, we forget to do it. But Americans are beginning to do this too now. StoryCorps is on National Public Radio. There are many ways to do it. But I was very happy to have that suggestion made just over this weekend. Whatever you do, tell the Hmong to get their stories down, get their oral histories down. So that's my suggestion.
Well, Lionel, I want to thank you for an opportunity meeting you and chat with you. And I know that you've been busy, a gentleman, got your trip still traveling.
Yes.
But yet take your time coming visit us here, and I really do appreciate that. And thank you so much. And many blessings for you in your trip and all the help that you can give to anyone in the future. But I'm here. Anything that we could do to help and team up, always welcome.
Well, thank you. A real privilege to be with you. Keep up your fine work. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Trong xe tới trong này cái tin cha trong này sẽ đợi cho nhân văn được chế là cô cùng đã ư nhau là theo lại nó cũng ít thu nên thì sẽ đáp bảo sáng cả cho bây giờ sẽ đợi giờ bây giờ mong được hai nên tên là cũng vậy thu sáng cả tali là giờ khả cô trong tàu thì này cô hay lúc xưa là một cùng đã cũng là cô nhân dân cha nhất với mong USA TV lúc xưa mong trình kiến là cho tôi muốn chỉ nên số lên số tụ tập vào chế nên cái kia thì cứ tên này thì chỉ trong xe với mà lịch sinh chế đó được rồi đó bye bye cho nên sẽ đã